Imagine you are standing on the deck of a wooden ship in the middle of the North Atlantic, 3 weeks from the nearest port, and the storm that nearly killed you has finally passed. The waves are calming. The crew is exhaling. And then someone points at the water. There's a figure standing on the surface, not floating, not drowning, standing just beyond the hull, watching. The skin looks wrong. The eyes look wrong. And every experienced sailor on that deck, men who have crossed oceans and survived things that would destroy most people, goes completely silent because they know exactly what they are looking at. This is not a ghost story invented for children. This is not a metaphor cooked up by nervous writers. For over 300 years, hardened maritime professionals, men whose entire lives were built around mastering the sea, described the same figure in the same circumstances with the same outcome. And the name they gave him was one that sailors, across multiple languages and centuries, refused to speak carelessly. Davy Jones. Not because he was a fairy tale, but because they genuinely believed he came for the dead. The ocean has always demanded respect in a way that no other environment on Earth quite matches. You can run from a forest fire. You can shelter from a landslide. But the sea surrounds you completely, sits directly beneath you at all times, and operates by rules that 16th and 17th century sailors were only beginning to understand. Storms could appear within hours. Currents could drag a ship miles off course overnight. And the deep water below the hull was not simply unknown. It was unknowable, in a way that pressed constantly against the imagination of anyone who spent months at sea. The phrase Davy Jones's locker entered written record in 1726 in a work attributed to Daniel Defoe. But Defoe did not invent it. He recorded it. The language he used made clear this was already a phrase sailors understood, already a concept embedded deep in maritime vocabulary, which means the legend was older, passed through generations of sailors before anyone thought to write it down. That matters, because it tells you this was not a literary invention. It was a living fear, and what it referred to was something specific. The locker was the bottom of the sea, not as a poetic description, but as a destination. Sailors who drowned at sea, who left no body, no grave, no ceremony behind, were not simply dead. They were collected, taken, stored in a vast, lightless place at the ocean floor from which no soul ever returned. It was imagined as a kind of underwater prison, a chest so enormous it contained every man the sea had ever swallowed, and those men were not at rest. They were kept. The theological weight of this idea was enormous. In Anglican maritime culture, proper burial mattered deeply. A body needed to be committed to the earth with words spoken over it. Without that, something was left unfinished. A sailor buried on land was believed to go to God. A sailor taken by the sea went somewhere else entirely. Davy Jones was the name of that somewhere else. He was not merely a metaphor for drowning. He was the answer to the question that no sailor could stop asking. What happens to the men who go overboard and never come back? Jones gave that horror a face and a destination. Captains understood the power of this belief, and they used it. The threat of Jones was a genuine disciplinary tool aboard ships, because it worked on something deeper than the fear of punishment. Every sailor on a vessel had watched men drown. They had seen companions go over the railing in storms and simply cease to exist. The warning that careless sailors ended up in the locker was not abstract. It connected directly to experiences every crew member carried with them. It was fear built on memory. But then there is the other part of the legend, the part that is harder to explain away. Davy Jones was not only a place, he was a figure. Sailors did not just speak of the locker in the abstract. They claimed to see him, and the descriptions, across ships that had no contact with each other, across decades and different naval traditions, were remarkably consistent. He appeared as almost human rather than obviously monstrous. Dark, enlarged eyes, skin with a blue-gray undertone, described in multiple accounts as resembling someone who had drowned. Rows of teeth that did not look right, and he appeared not during the worst moments, but after them. He came when the crew thought they had survived. A British naval log from 1732 records a sailor named Thomas Collie claiming to see a figure standing on the water near floating wreckage after a storm. The captain dismissed the report. 3 days later, Thomas Collie drowned when his own ship capsized in a sudden squall. This pattern appears again and again across maritime records. A sailor sees the figure, reports it, and then dies within days, sometimes taking the entire ship with him. The Royal Navy officially recorded these events as unusual occurrences but never investigated them, and never connected reports across different vessels. That choice, the decision to record without examining, is itself quietly strange. Where did the legend actually come from? 3 theories have circulated among historians and maritime scholars for generations, and none of them fully closes the case. The first points to a Welsh pirate named Davy Jones who operated in the early 1630s. He was said to capture merchant crews, lock them below the waterline in airless holds, and scuttle the ship. Survivors, the few who escaped before the vessel went under, spread his reputation across ports. Over time, the locker he used to kill his victims may have transformed into something mythological. The problem is that the historical record on this Davy Jones is fragmented. Historians cannot firmly verify him, which either means he was too minor to document properly, or that the story grew around a partially invented figure. The second theory runs deeper, tracing the legend back to the biblical story of Jonah. In maritime slang, a Jonah was already a common term for a sailor who brought disaster. Crews in extreme storms sometimes looked for someone to blame. Meanwhile, the name Davy had older associations in British folk tradition with the devil, appearing in phrases that predate the maritime legend entirely. The theory suggests these two currents, the cursed sailor figure and the devil at sea imagery, gradually fused into a single entity. Jonah became Jones. The folk devil became a maritime demon. And over generations, he took on a shape. The third theory is the one that sits least comfortably. It proposes that Davy Jones was not invented at all, that sailors were encountering something real, something that moved in the water and appeared before disaster, and mythology was simply the only framework they had to describe it. They were not hallucinating the same figure across centuries. They were naming something they had no other word for. Consider what sailors of the 17th century actually knew about the deep ocean. Almost nothing. Strange creatures occasionally surfaced in fishing nets. Things with no eyes, with bodies that did not match any known species, that continued to move after they should have been dead. A Newfoundland fisherman in 1639 reportedly caught something he could not identify and cut it apart on deck. It kept moving. The crew threw it back. The deep sea was not a distant, theoretical mystery. It existed directly beneath their feet at all times, a world as foreign as another planet, and they sailed above it for months at a stretch knowing it could take them at any moment. By the mid-1700s, British, Dutch, Spanish, and Portuguese sailors were all telling versions of the same story. He collected the drowned. He kept them. He appeared before death. He was never fully visible. These were sailors who spoke different languages and sailed under different flags, and had no coordinated reason to share a mythology. But the core details stayed consistent, and the consistency is the part that resists easy dismissal. In 1812, a British supply vessel recorded crew members seeing a figure walking on calm water before the ship began taking on water. 7 men drowned. The captain noted that several experienced sailors gave independently matching descriptions without consulting each other. In 1835, a 17-year-old sailor aboard a Nantucket whaling vessel was found dead on deck with no injury and no illness. The ship's doctor recorded cardiac arrest. The captain privately wrote that when the boy was found, he was pointing at the ocean. By the 19th century, the Royal Navy had seen enough of these reports that they took official action. They classified Davy Jones as superstition. The name was banned from formal log entries. Captains were expected to discipline sailors who spread the stories. The result was predictable. The ban made the legend more charged, not less. Sailors simply stopped writing it down and kept talking about it anyway. Rational explanations exist, and they deserve to be taken seriously. Sleep deprivation, prolonged stress, social isolation, and constant physical danger are conditions that produce hallucinations. Sailors of this era worked on schedules that would now be considered medically dangerous. A man who has not slept properly in 3 weeks, who has watched companions die, who is surrounded by water in every direction, is exactly the kind of person who might see things that are not there. That explains some of it, but it does not explain the consistency. Hallucination is personal. It produces images drawn from individual memory and fear, not coordinated reports of the same blue-skinned figure with the same enlarged eyes appearing at the same moment before the same type of disaster. On ships that never shared a port. The real horror was never supernatural. It was statistical. The Dutch East India Company alone lost over 400 ships around the Cape of Good Hope between 1600 and 1800. More than 60,000 sailors drowned in those waters. One company. One shipping lane. 2 centuries. These were not isolated tragedies. Maritime death was industrial in scale. Crews lived with the constant, daily, physical reality of sudden loss. They needed a way to think about it that did not break them. Davy Jones gave them that. If he collected the drowned, then the drowned were somewhere. The horror of the locker was inseparable from its strange, dark comfort. It named a destination. It made loss legible. Without Jones, drowning was pure erasure. No purpose, no place, no meaning. And human beings, even experienced ones, even hardened sailors who had seen things that would destroy most people, cannot psychologically survive inside pure meaninglessness. They needed a word for what the ocean did, so they built one. The deep ocean is the largest ecosystem on Earth. It is also the greatest mass grave in human history. Hundreds of thousands of ships and millions of drowned people remain down there, preserved in darkness and cold and pressure. Sailors may have been wrong about the mythology, but they were not wrong that everything the sea takes, it keeps. No devil created Davy Jones's locker, but it exists, and everything lost inside it is still there. Some things are not myths. They are just truths that have not yet found a better word.